Gender is Burning, Questions of Appropriation and Subversion by Judith Butler, feminist film critic. Judith Butler is a graduate of Yale, identifies as a non-binary lesbian with a wife and kids, and focuses their work on feminist philosophy. They have written many books, one of which, Who's Afraid of Gender, Gender is Burning, and Gender Trouble being the most notable ones. Their essay deals with film theory, race, class, identity, realness, and philosophy, all while tying it to the movie Paris is Burning by Jennifer Livingston. All right. Hello, everyone. These are the keywords on Judith Butler's Gender is Burning essay. The buzzword that you really want to know when you're going to read this essay is hegemonic. Appears probably 100 times in front of every sentence. A lot of the times it doesn't really need to be there. So hegemonic describes a dominant system of ideas, values, or norms that become accepted as common and natural, even though it serves the interests of those in power, usually the patriarchy. And that's how Judith Butler is seeing that throughout the lens of the essay and Paris is Burning, which we will get into later. Next, we have subjectification, which is the process by which people become social subjects by being shaped by the power and social norms, kind of like sociology, meaning we become recognizable selves through control. Another word is misrecognition, when someone understands or sees themselves through standards that don't truly reflect their experience, kind of like transgender people, which is reflected in this essay as well. We also have parody/performance. The thesis statement of this essay is drag performance, is gender performance? So the opposite of that would be parody. She does mention parody as performance, kind of going over what drag is. Next, we have phantasmatic, which is kind of fantasy. And in this lens, it is kind of the white male gaze looking at the drag queens in a phantasmatic way, existing more as a powerful dream, ideal, or image of a woman, which is kind of what Judith Butler is arguing that drag is doing. Next, we have ambivalence. That means having mixed or conflicting feelings about something at the same time. Two things can coexist at the same time in one's mind. That's what she's going for with drag being misogynistic and feminist, kind of. They don't really say which one specifically, give weight to both arguments, and say that it's okay if they exist together in ambivalence. Next, we have commodification, which is the process of turning ideas, identities into products that can be bought, sold, or consumed. She does speak about how drag kind of turn into a commodification, kind of if the women in Paris is Burning are turning themselves into objects, which the woman is not seen as the other. Next, we have realness, which is also a buzzword. The standard of being recognized as believable or legitimate according to social rules. She sees this about recognition, power, safety, and she argues that it shows how powerful social rules really are, because people aren't really performing for fun, but rather that's just how they're conditioned to be. Next, we have gender, which is a hot topic today in 2025. It's a set of socially constructed roles, behaviors, and expectations. Judith Butler, in some of her other books, does say that gender and sex should be switched, because I think it's one of their essays, they said that gender is more who we are as opposed to sex being the biological aspect. That's in another one of her books that I looked at. And we have heterosexuality, a socially informed system that assumes attraction between men and women. And a lot of her critiques are through the heterosexual lens, and how, I think she says, quote, heterosexual straight white men are viewing drag queens in the society today. So there you have it with all of the keywords. It's also important to be familiar with Louis Althusser's concept of interpolation. Louis Althusser is a Marxist theorist, and his theory of interpolation is the mechanism through which pre-existing social structures construct individual human organisms as subjects. He doesn't consider that people who are hailed into the social structures might be able to refuse the conformity that's required, although repetition of the law into hyperbole, a re-articulation of the law against the authority of the one who delivers it. And that is paraphrased from his book, Ideology and Ideological State Apparatuses. Judith Butler does discuss this theorist in the first part of their essay, and it does relate to ideology. Ideology is a representation of this imaginary relationship. It's not just an illusion which can easily be dispelled by a correct interpolation. Althusser is asking how people come to live voluntarily within class, gender, racial, or other identities, and argues that this happens through state apparatuses like family, mass media, schools, churches, judicial systems, government, continually telling individuals what they are and they should be from infancy. Hello. Now that you all know the key terms relating to this essay, let's get into the main points and figure out what in the world she is talking about. So, we start with introduction and theoretical framework, where they reference Althusser's, I think I'm saying that correctly, concept of interpolation, where subjects are socially constituted through the laws addressed, and use an example of a police officer going, "Hey, you." They explain how the law's reprimand forms the subject and question whether subjectification is solely a result of compliance with the law. She also talks about misrecognition and resistance, critiquing the idea of bad subjects and exploring how the law can be refused, parodied, or rearticulated. She induces the concept of performative in gender and the law's attempt to create lawful subjects, produces consequences, sometimes unintended. She also speaks about ambivalence, explains how hegemonic norms can be mimed, parodied, performed. She also goes over analysis of drag and gender. This is where they start talking about the movie Paris is Burning, critiquing the feminist argument that drag is inherently misogynistic, while also noting that its identification with gender norms is an ambivalent process and doesn't really have a straight answer. That is something that many other film critics have discussed, not necessarily talking about drag, but also just the concept of womanhood. Now, in the film Paris is Burning, as I'll mention later, made in 1990, about a kind of documentary-style movie of a bunch of drag queens in New York City. It's very gritty, real, and is kind of hosted by Venus Extravaganza and her children, which are up-and-coming drag queens and performers in what they call the ball, a competition. She discusses the concept of realness in these performances, which invokes mimicking and embodying social norms. Relating to Venus Extravaganza, they die by strangulation, unfortunately. Their deaths highlights the constraints of denaturalization and oppressive power of the hegemonic society. Venus's desire to become a real woman or pass as a real woman reflects the promise of escaping poverty, racism, and homophobia that the other participants feel that they have to deal with. They also go over a section about the camera's gaze, critiquing the filmmaker Jenny Livingston's position as a white lesbian, and I will also discuss that in the discussion section of this video. They also talk about drag ball culture, ambivalence of appropriation and subversion, concluding with that Paris is Burning documents an unstable coexistence of appropriation and subversion at the same time. It's a ball of two constricting ideas that Judith Butler is trying to pair up against another while comparing each side pretty well and critiquing other essayists. They do mention bell hooks in this essay and offer an interesting perspective on them, which I have also read. So now go watch me doing an interview with someone. All right, so we have Gustavo here.
Hi.
And we're going to ask them a question about drag pertaining to Judith Butler, which we're talking about right now. So, what do you think about drag, how it relates to society's perception of gender? Do you think that drag queens performing, maybe do you feel like that's harming society's perception of women? Thinking about how much women have to go through to be almost accepted, like those makeup, plastic surgery, clothes. Do you think that they already have a high standard and that's just pushing the standard? What do you think about that?
I don't think it's pushing the standard. The standard is definitely there, but I don't feel like drag will ever be like a make or break deal that ever pushes someone over the edge because of something drag related. Drag is already something so niche that not to look that many people are in, so I don't think it has enough like weight and power to be a negative. It can be a positive because like it allows males to explore femininity in that sort of context, and it can be a negative in like the way people can perceive the like that femininity in as being artificial, but that's really only like depends on what the person interprets.
Yeah, that's kind of what the author is saying, is that gender, especially femininity, is unnatural almost, and then they're saying that we all should start as like a blank space, and then society kind of folds us into that without us really realizing it. Because of that. So their main thesis statement is, to claim that all gender is like drag is to suggest hegemonic heterosexuality is itself a constant and repeated effort to imitate its own idealizations. So they're saying that being straight is kind of intimidating itself, and that it's something that you can't really achieve. What do you think?
Basically, I would say that quote, at that context in the essay, I would say that quote is saying, I'm trying to think of how to put it. People see the act of doing drag as being somebody being funny and dressing up as something that is not natural. It's, oh, haha, look at that, it's unnatural and silly.
Yeah.
But I think that they're calling attention to the idea that really our day-to-day presentation of gender is also unnatural and silly in the ways that we go about it and how much effort we put into it. Are we really that different from that of a drag queen or a drag king doing something over the top to keep ourselves in line with this imaginary ideal that we just can't seem to attain?
Yeah, and they also speak a lot about drag as a parody, kind of copying gender in exaggerated ways, especially in the film that they discuss, Paris is Burning.
Mm.
What do you think?
Now, I personally haven't seen Paris is Burning, but I did read the synopsis for two other films they mentioned, Tootsie and, gosh, what's the other one called?
Some Like It Hot.
Some Like It Hot, yeah, which I guess people our age would probably relate more to Mrs. Doubtfire, being sort of heterosexual people's almost drag for themselves, where they make a film and it has drag elements in it, and the joke is, oh, you were almost gay, you know, or something, or you were almost doing drag.
Because a quote in here is, in this sense, then drag is subversive to the extent that it reflects on the imitative structure by which gender is itself produced and disputes heterosexuality's claim on naturalness and originality.
Yeah, I remember reading that line, because if I remember correctly, it was basically just saying that part of what makes heterosexuality so effective is convincing people that anything else is wrong, which is pretty much every oppressive regime's base of operation, if you can convince other people that there is an other,
Yeah.
you'll be more
And they
effective.
do talk about like a sense of otherness, like the woman is aspiring to be this sense of other, which is kind of unattainable for everyone. Like no one can really like become like, they're all trying to be like the best form of their gender, I guess.
Yeah.
Like with like steroids, working out for guys, and like makeup, boob jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, not saying that that's a bad thing, but like overdoing it and then creating a parody of that for the straight man. Like,
Consumption.
yeah, consumption through drag.
Yeah, really, when you look at, especially with women, but men kind of suffer from it too. But when you do look at, like, what are the ideals of a woman? What makes you feminine? The things that make women feminine are not really natural things. It typically gets attributed to being super thin, wearing makeup, like you said, potentially having a really curvy body type, which a lot of women will seek plastic surgery out to achieve. Being hairless, that's not the natural state of a woman. Obviously, having makeup on your face or hair extensions and things like that is not the natural state of a woman. So why do people feel like just being their natural selves is not woman enough?
Yeah. And so on that context, she does bring up the term realness, like specifically passing as socially dominant identities. Kind of what we talked about with the drag, like they're trying to be a real woman, passing as a real woman. And then in the movie Paris is Burning, the question is, does it get that woman, like Mrs. Extravaganza, killed? So that's kind of the question here. So what does it say about a society of safety depends on how well you imitate power, especially in like the culture of patriarchy and power like already being emboldened into the society so much that we don't even really notice it.
I mean, I think it's a very sad but true truth. If you want to move up in this...
Hegemony is what she says, yeah.
Oh Lord, I could get into the essay and some of the words, but I think if you want to move up in the world, you definitely have to imitate power. And for women, that could be imitating masculinity, which it is just a sad truth. You will get more respect if you can, at least to me, you can get different types of respect if you steer away from femininity, because femininity is not always respected in certain spaces, and it can actually make people look down on you. Now, that's just my personal opinion. That's not based on any statistics or anything.
Yeah.
But I do think her case of, again, I have not seen, what is it, A Night in Paris? Or Paris is Burning. I have not seen that movie. I just know the little synopsis of what she said. But I'm not so sure that the act of drag specifically would have been what got the drag queen killed. Because at the end of the day, men who do drag can take it off. It's different for trans people, it's different for women.
Yeah.
You don't just
that's
take
kind
that
of
off.
one of their arguments as well, is like, does it equate to being transsexual, like they say in the essay?
I actually did read her part of that essay, and she did say that she was critiquing another woman who had
Bell
written a
Hooks.
review. Yep.
Yeah.
And she disagreed with Bell Hooks' idea that transgender people and drag queens and even cross-dressers are like all the same thing, which I agreed with. They're not. It seemed like she was, or the author, what's her name? Judith Butler was against that notion, which again I think comes from their perspective being more like a non-binary lesbian, having a little bit more sensitivity to that and understand. Basically, Butler made a really interesting point at this part of the essay, because they essentially said that the person they were critiquing, Belle, had this very like anti-drag mentality, which Butler's not even that pro-drag to begin with, so I was surprised that they went to bat for drag in this way, but Belle was very anti-drag, thinking that it was degrading, that it was a mockery of women, and it seemed like Butler kind of called her out on that and said that the world didn't revolve around her, essentially. It was like a very fancy, pretentious way of saying that. And that Butler made an interesting point that they felt like a lot of feminists kind of would come after gay men in that way, of being like, oh, you guys are misogynistic, and being gay is misogynistic, and centering the gay male experience around women because they wanted to like reclaim that power.
A critique of Paris is Burning that they do offer is that because the director Jenny Livingston approaches the subject matter as an outsider looking in, that her perspective as a white woman lesbian filmmaker is more absent from it, and it's not as auteur. So Judith Butler is kind of looking at it from more of a neutral perspective, and I think that they would like to have that movie have more of the director's personal experiences in it.
So do you think having the movie directed by just like a white lesbian versus an actual drag queen would impact the storytelling? Like, do you think it would be better if it was?
I think it would. I feel like the movie is very competition based on drag, kind of like RuPaul and like RuPaul's Drag Race and stuff that we have right now. So I feel like they are kind of seeing drag from that perspective. It's like, oh, you're making kind of a mockery of it. So
Interesting.
yes, I would say it would be different if a drag queen directed the movie, but I don't think it's that much different as opposed to like a straight white male directing it.
Fair point. Because it was still a lesbian.
Yeah.
Movie.
Yeah. And they kind of wrap it up with saying Paris is Burning documents neither an efficacious insurrection nor a painful resubordination, but an unstable coexistence of both. Now, I'm gonna have to break that down a little bit. The film attests to the painful pleasures of eroticizing and miming the very norms that wield the power by foreclosing the very reverse occupations that the children nevertheless perform. It's a lot of words.
Read that one more time.
So going off of that, Judith Butler is very dense, and from what someone wrote, pretentious and elitist and extremist.
Yeah, that was like the first line of a YouTube video when you look up analysis of Judith
A
Butler.
lot of things in this don't really need to be said with as many words as they are, and there are some critiques about it. What are your critiques?
My critique? Judith Butler makes some very interesting points, but I do think there's something to be said about covering up your point with so much inflated language that you make it unreadable. People are not going to get your point or understand what you're saying if they can't even get through the first paragraph because they can barely read it. Which I know that you can make a case where people have a literature problem, but the truth is most people speak in plain writing. That's why there's a government mandate for like government documents to be in plain writing, because if you want your message to be accessible, you have to make it accessible. So
flowery language.
There was a lot of moments. Sorry.
So let's see. How would drag relate to like the heterosexual, according to her? Let's see. I would say that she does introduce re-signification and like denaturalization in there. So kind of taking harmful norms and twisting their meanings through like repetition and different films. She really is trying to say that change doesn't really come from escaping the norms, but comes from the inside, like her example of the black drag queen directing the movie instead. So that way she could have more like auteur experiences in the films is how they want to change it. But I think that like the straight white people that she's talking about probably aren't really going to see that or really care that much, because they're going to see it as just a performance.
But she does mention the heterosexual people do like drag. They just like certain types of drag, the kind that they make.
They
So
can laugh
they,
at.
huh?
The kind they can laugh at.
Yeah, like think this is out there. So it can be socially acceptable, but only if the drag is painted as a gag, and only if there's like a homosexual scare, but there's nothing actually homosexual going on. Like the man dressed as a woman is into a woman because he's a man, but it's like, oh no, she thinks he's a lesbian, and it's funny and haha. You
Yeah.
know, it's a spectacle that you can laugh at.
And that kind of relates to the film that we watched in relation to this essay, Dog Day Afternoon, where the transgender woman at the end, I feel like it's supposed to be like nice and respectful, but still I feel like how it's acted out is seen as still a performance and kind of the gag of the movie. Because you have the hyper-masculine Al Pacino and his partner who is vehemently denying being gay, and then at the end of the movie you have this transsexual woman, kind of like a parody of what a trans person actually is, just to throw it in there in the movie, even though that did actually happen, and the person is still alive, I believe, too, it was based on. So I wonder how she would have seen herself in that movie as a performance, because honestly, I don't think I would be very happy if I saw myself kind of like over dramatized like that, because it felt like the woman in Dog Day Afternoon was in drag, is what it felt like. So
yeah, it's so strange how that does seem to happen with like queer representation in movies, where they do almost make the character into a caricature, despite arguably trying to make a nice movie where it should be something positive. A lot of times queer characters will still come out feeling like a caricature because apparently it's just difficult to write them. I don't know. I don't know when that happens, but I would definitely argue that Butler does seem to take on the opinion that straight people put a lot more effort into their gender than we would think they do, because they make you feel like it's just natural. You know, that's just how you are, but this is kind of, you know, old Instagram or Tumblr quote or whatever, but if women being submissive was natural, you wouldn't have to spend all this effort into marketing to them to be submissive. So there is an effort of, or a layer of effort that must go into it, and so I think you're right, Butler probably doesn't believe that we make a choice. Although I would say that conditioning plays a large role in the choices we believe are available to us. And I do think social stigma plays a large role in the options we feel are available to us, or that are available to us, because people can retaliate with violence if they don't think that you're fitting into what you're supposed to. And obviously the level of violence can differ based on your area and your culture. So not everyone has the option, but some do.
yeah. So you would say that the dual nature of drag is both subversive and appropriate practice?
I would agree with Butler's take that at its best it can be very subversive, it can be a community for people,
And
it can, yeah.
It says that a lot of it reinforces the, hegemonic norms.
At its worst, I agree. I think
Yeah.
at its worst it can absolutely be a misogynistic attack on women that just further enforces that they're stupid.
And so through this essay, she really considers the implications of drag on the perception of gender, sexuality.
It's 100% on the person, because not every drag queen is going to be the same, and they're not all going to have the same goal, and they're not all going to do drag in the same way. So.
And I feel like that's also a critique of her as well, is that they seem to be seeing all drag queens specifically through the lens of Paris is Burning as one unit.
Yeah,
kind of.
A little bit.
And whereas what about I've seen trans men do drag as men and as women. I've seen transgender men drag women.
I've seen some female drag queens.
So I feel like you're also excluding some groups with that, because also the cosplay, is that gender? If you cosplay something that is an opposite gender, is that kind of subversing that, or is that enforcing the gender roles? So that's kind of could be put under the same umbrella, maybe. Because I feel like it's very specific and not really taking into account what does drag do for the individual? How does that help that individual understand their gender and express it better, instead of coming from it from kind of a large overlooking view of this is a neutral thing that's kind of bad and good, but we said, it's really individual for each person individually.
Yeah.
So I feel like they're kind of saying this as a fact, almost.
Of course, when was this written? Because I would also...
1988.
That might also be where they're coming from with that, because I will say the idea of like trans men being drag kings or queens, cis women being drag queens, or even like trans women or just like gay people in general being included outside of cis gay men, I feel like that is a modern concept. Like there has been a push for that recently of like we should be included too.
Yeah.
But historically, you would not see that happening. So
especially because around this time, I think there was like the Lavender Menace going on, and like a lot of feminist uprisings around that time, and more movies were coming out.
But I would say that maybe Butler's perspective, and especially a lot of the feminist perspectives of it being a really big negative, might also be coming from the culture of the time of it genuinely being something where men could profit off of it, but yet the women were still being belittled and still being made fun of, still didn't have all of their rights.
That's pretty much what's been talked about in a lot of the other essays.
I think that's where
especially with like Laura Mulvey
comes from. But now I think in a modern perspective it's a lot easier to look at drag and be like, oh, it is fun. But that's because we're not really facing the same hardships as these women in the 60s, 70s, 80s. It's just not the same thing for us.
So it's kind of hard to look at it from the perspective of still not even having marriage equality.
Right. Like
and like women couldn't even own a credit card until like what, 1972?
Yes.
As an aside, while editing, it's important to think about my rebuttals to my own arguments and speak about interpretations that could be the opposite of what we are talking about. The argument into Butler's flowery language and pretentiousness in the critique section could be a step overdrawn, and it's important to note that Butler's argument is that the difficult language and structure of the essay is necessary to cognitively derange the reader so that they can start to see the world differently and beyond the commonplace of Western thinking. Although it is a critique of their difficult language and makes it hard for the common or average reader to understand it, their argument is comparing the fact that you must exercise your brain and philosophical and sociological muscles to understand what is being said, comparing that to the way that we as collective humans can see the world completely differently, breaking out of the lab rat's maze and running out of the science lab altogether. They want us to flip everything we know upside down and re-examine our world to be able to get out of the ideology. It also can be argued that the essay does not reduce gender to choice. Early in the essay, it says that social norms and pressures tend to constrain and naturalize our gender identifications, forcing us to repeat and reperform them throughout our lives. This is where the discussion of Althusser and interpolation come in once more, because his theory of interpolation is saying that.
As a queer person who has an interest in philosophy and film, this essay was really interesting for me to read and analyze, and I still feel like there's a lot of it that I didn't quite grasp. I feel like there's so much that Judith Butler is trying to say, and I feel like I came to a really good understanding of this video, and I hope that this video helped you understand the concepts of Judith Butler's essay. Let's finish off this video with a quote from Paris is Burning by Dorian Corey. Quote, "Everybody wants to make an impression, some mark upon the world. Then you think you've made a mark on the world if you just get through it and a few people remember your name. Then you've left a mark. You don't have to bend the whole world. I think it's better to just enjoy it. Pay your dues and just enjoy it. If you shoot an arrow and it goes real high, hooray for you."